She arrived at the music academy early in the morning, just as the city was waking up. The building stood quiet, with tall windows and wide stone steps that had been worn smooth by years of footsteps. She paused at the entrance, holding a small folder close to her chest, taking a slow breath before going inside. She had not planned to draw attention. All she wanted was to ask about a simple job and leave quietly, the way she usually did in most places. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. The sound of distant piano practice floated through the halls, soft and broken, like pieces of a song still learning how to come together. She walked carefully, her shoes barely making a sound on the floor. People passed by her without much notice. A few glanced at her plain clothes and calm posture, then looked away just as quickly. She waited near the front office, sitting straight on a wooden chair. Her hands rested neatly on her lap, fingers relaxed but steady. While waiting, her eyes drifted down the hallway where a grand piano stood near an open practice room. The piano looked old but well cared for, its black surface reflecting the light from the windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The familiar shape pulled her thoughts far away from the present. The receptionist was busy, and time moved slowly. The woman's gaze returned to the piano again and again. She did not walk toward it at first. She only listened. Someone nearby played a few uneven notes, stopping and starting, struggling through a lesson. She closed her eyes briefly, as if following the music in her mind, correcting it silently without realizing she was doing so. When the hallway finally emptied, she stood and took a few careful steps toward the piano. She did not sit down right away. Instead, she rested her fingers lightly on the edge of the instrument, almost like greeting an old friend after many years apart. Her touch was gentle, respectful. She pressed one key softly just once. The sound was clear and warm. It echoed longer than she expected, filling the empty space. She quickly pulled her hand back, glancing around to make sure no one had noticed. She did not want trouble or attention. Still, something about being that close made her chest feel tight, filled with memories she had kept quiet for a long time. She told herself she was only waiting for her turn at the office. Nothing more. From a nearby room, a group of teachers stepped into the hall, talking among themselves. Their voices were confident, sharp, and used to being heard. They noticed her standing near the piano and paused. One raised an eyebrow. Another exchanged a look that carried more judgment than curiosity. They saw a modest woman in simple clothes, standing too close to an instrument meant for students and professionals. They did not see the years behind her calm eyes. They did not hear the music she carried inside. Instead, they assumed she was curious, maybe careless, or simply out of place. One of them asked her why she was there. The tone was not cruel, but it was cold, as if the answer had already been decided. She replied softly, explaining she was waiting to ask about work. Her voice was polite and steady, but quiet enough that it seemed unsure to those listening. The teachers glanced at each other again. One of them smiled in a way that was not kind. Another pointed at the piano and asked if she played. The question sounded simple, but it was loaded with doubt. She hesitated, then answered honestly that she had played before a long time ago. That small answer changed the mood. What could have ended as a brief conversation turned into something else. The teachers, confident in their judgment, decided to test her. They believed it would be harmless, even amusing. If she truly knew nothing, she would fail quickly. If she knew a little, she would still be far from impressive. They invited her to sit at the piano. The word invited felt polite, but the pressure behind it was clear. Several students had gathered nearby, drawn by the raised voices and sudden attention. The woman felt her face warm. She did not want to perform. She did not want eyes on her. But refusing now would only make things worse. She sat down slowly on the bench, felt lower than she remembered, or maybe she had changed. The keys looked the same as always, black and white, waiting. One of the teachers placed sheet music in front of her. It was a difficult piece, filled with fast movements and complex patterns. It was not something given to beginners or casual players. The woman stared at the notes. Her heart beat faster, not from fear of the music, but from fear of what might come after. She had worked hard to live quietly, to stay unnoticed. Music had once been her entire world, and leaving it had cost her more than anyone knew. Now, without warning, that world sat in front of her again. A teacher reminded her to begin. The room felt heavy with expectation, most of it unkind. Some students whispered, already sure of the outcome. She took a deep breath, placing her hands gently above the keys, not touching them yet. For a brief moment, she considered standing up and walking away. No job was worth this feeling. But another thought followed just as quickly. She had nothing to prove, yet she also had nothing to hide. Music had shaped her life, even if she no longer lived inside it. She lowered her hands to the keyboard. Her fingers curved naturally without effort. She closed her eyes, not to escape the room, but to enter a space she knew well. The noise around her faded. The pressure faded. Only the piano remained. She did not start playing yet. Instead, she adjusted her posture the way she always had. It was a small movement, almost unnoticeable, but it carried confidence built over years. A few of the teachers frowned, sensing something they could not explain. Her fingers hovered, steady and ready. The room grew quiet, not because anyone asked for silence, but because something in her presence demanded it. Even the students stopped whispering. Just before the first note, she opened her eyes. There was no fear in them now, only calm. Whatever happened next, she would face it honestly. Her fingers began to move, and the first note filled the hall. The first note settled into the hall like a held breath finally released. It was clean and steady, not rushed. A few people expected a mistake right away, something awkward or unsure. Instead, the sound was calm, controlled, and placed exactly where it should be. She continued with the opening line, keeping the tempo even. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence, not fast, not slow. The melody began to form clearly, each note connected to the next. A student near the doorway leaned in slightly, listening closer. Another stopped tapping a foot and looked up. The teachers stood with folded arms, watching closely. At first, they assumed this was luck. Anyone could play a few correct notes, they thought. The difficult part would come soon. They waited for it, almost eager for the stumble that would confirm their judgment. But the stumble did not come. As the piece moved forward, her hands traveled across the keys with ease. She did not look at the sheet music as often as expected. Sometimes her eyes lifted, unfocused, as if she were seeing something far away. The music did not sound careful or forced. It sounded natural, like a story being told rather than a task being completed. Whispers spread quietly among the students. This was not how beginners played. This was not how someone rusty played either. There was control in her touch, and more than that, there was feeling. Each note carried intention. One of the teachers shifted their weight, clearing their throat. Another leaned closer to the piano, eyes narrowed, following her hands. They noticed details now that they had not expected to see. Her posture was balanced. Her wrist stayed relaxed. Her fingers curved just right, never stiff, never careless. She reached a more complex section, one filled with fast movements and sudden changes. This was where many players struggled. The teachers exchanged quick looks, certain this was the moment it would fall apart. Instead, her playing grew stronger. The rhythm tightened, her hands moving independently but in perfect harmony. The left hand supported the piece with strength, while the right carried the melody with clarity. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. The notes flowed as if she had lived inside this piece for years. The hall felt different now. Conversations in nearby rooms faded as people gathered without realizing it. Someone closed a door softly so the sound would not interrupt. Even those who knew little about music could feel that something rare was happening. The woman herself seemed unchanged on the outside. Her face remained calm, almost peaceful. But inside, emotions stirred quietly. Memories surfaced with each phrase. Practice rooms late at night. Long hours of repetition. Applause that once felt endless, then suddenly gone. She pushed those thoughts aside and stayed with the present moment. The piano responded to her touch, warm and full. She adjusted her dynamics without thinking, allowing some notes to rise and others to soften. It was not about showing skill. It was about letting the music breathe. One of the teachers lowered their arms. Another stopped watching the sheet music and focused only on her hands. Doubt crept in, unwelcome and unsettling. This was not supposed to happen. This was not the plan. As the piece moved toward its middle section, the difficulty increased again. Rapid passages demanded precision. A small mistake here would be obvious. The woman leaned in slightly, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady. She did not miss a single note. A quiet gasp escaped from someone near the back. A student's eyes widened. This was no accident. This was no hidden talent discovered by chance. This was mastery. The teachers could feel the room slipping out of their control. What had started as a test now felt like an audience. They had not prepared for this, not emotionally and not professionally. Their earlier confidence began to feel heavy. The woman reached a softer passage, letting the music slow. The sound grew gentle, almost fragile. In that softness, something deeper appeared. The emotion in her playing touched places words could not reach. A few listeners felt a tightness in their chest without knowing why. She had not meant to reveal herself this way. She had only wanted to get through the moment. But music has a way of telling truths that people try to hide. Every choice she made at the piano revealed years of experience, discipline, and loss. The teachers could no longer deny what they were hearing. One of them took a step back, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Another felt a sudden wave of embarrassment, remembering the tone they had used only minutes earlier. Still, the piece was not finished. The final section approached, demanding power and confidence. This was where the music asked the player to commit fully. The woman straightened slightly, her fingers ready. When she entered the final passage, the sound filled the hall completely. It was strong but never harsh, confident but never arrogant. Each chord landed with purpose, each run clear and controlled. The audience stood frozen. No one whispered now. No one moved. The teachers watched in stunned silence, their earlier assumptions unraveling with every second. As the last notes approached, the woman allowed herself a small breath. She was no longer thinking about judgment or outcome. She was simply playing the way she always had. The final chord rang out, full and resonant. She held it just long enough, then lifted her hands from the keys. Silence followed. It was not an empty silence. It was thick, heavy, filled with realization. The woman kept her hands in her lap, eyes lowered. She did not smile. She did not look around. For a moment, no one knew what to do. The teachers stood still, their faces unreadable. Students stared at the piano, then at her, then back again. What they had expected was gone. What remained was something none of them had prepared for. She finally looked up, her expression calm and composed. Whatever came next, she had already said everything she needed to say through the music. The silence after the final note did not break right away. It stretched on, long enough to make the woman wonder if she had gone too far. She kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, her back straight, her eyes lowered. She did not look proud. She did not look nervous. She simply waited. Slowly, the room began to breathe again. Someone shifted their feet. Another person swallowed loudly. The sound felt strange after such intense quiet. A few students glanced at one another, unsure if they were allowed to react. This was not how moments like this usually ended. One of the teachers finally cleared their throat. The sound felt small compared to the music that had just filled the hall. Another teacher looked at the sheet music still resting on the piano stand, as if checking to make sure it was the same difficult piece they had chosen. It was. Nothing about the notes had changed. Only their understanding had. The woman slowly stood up from the bench. She pushed it back gently, making sure it did not scrape the floor. Her movements were careful, almost polite, as if she were a guest afraid of overstaying her welcome. She stepped away from the piano, giving it one last glance, then turned toward the teachers. She spoke softly, asking if there was anything else they needed. The question surprised them. There was no confidence in her voice, no challenge. Just simple courtesy. For a moment, no one answered. The teachers exchanged looks, each unsure of what the others were thinking. What had started as a small test had turned into something deeply uncomfortable. They had not meant to expose themselves this way. One teacher finally asked where she had learned to play like that. The tone was different now. Careful. Almost respectful. The woman hesitated before answering. She did not want to open doors she had spent years closing. She said she had studied music long ago. That was all. The answer was true, but incomplete. Her past with music was not something she shared easily. It held both pride and pain. For many years, music had demanded everything from her. Time, energy, sacrifice. When she finally stepped away, it was not because she had lost her skill, but because she had lost something else that mattered just as much. The teachers pressed gently, asking where she studied, who trained her, where she had performed. Each question felt heavier than the last. Students leaned in, curious now, sensing a story beneath the surface. She shook her head slightly and said she preferred not to talk about it. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes revealed a quiet firmness. This boundary was important to her. The teachers fell silent again. They realized they were standing on unfamiliar ground. They had judged her too quickly, and now they were the ones unsure of how to proceed. One of them apologized, not directly, but enough to be understood. They admitted they had not expected her level of ability. The words sounded formal, practiced, but they carried genuine surprise. The woman nodded, accepting the apology without comment. She did not seem angry. If anything, she looked relieved that the moment was passing. A few students began to whisper again, this time with admiration instead of doubt. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with respect. A few wondered what kind of life could lead someone to play like that and yet live so quietly. As the group slowly dispersed, the woman returned to the front office area. The receptionist finally noticed her again and smiled politely, unaware of what had just happened. The woman waited, just as she had before, holding her folder close. While she waited, her thoughts drifted inward. The music still echoed inside her. She had not planned to play that day. She had not planned to remember so much. She remembered early mornings filled with scales and exercises, fingers aching but determined. She remembered teachers who demanded perfection and audiences who expected magic every time. She remembered applause that once felt like approval, then slowly began to feel like pressure. There was a time when her life had been measured in performances and reviews. A time when silence felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Walking away from that life had been one of the hardest decisions she had ever made. People did not understand it then. They would not understand it now. She chose simplicity because it gave her space to breathe, to live without being watched, to let music belong to her again instead of the world. The sound of voices pulled her back to the present. Two teachers stood nearby, speaking quietly. They were discussing her, though they did not mean for her to hear. Words like exceptional and rare drifted through the air. She did not react. She had learned long ago that praise could be just as heavy as criticism. The receptionist finally called her forward. The woman explained she was asking about a simple position, nothing related to teaching or performing. The receptionist looked surprised but nodded, handing her a form to fill out. As she wrote, one of the teachers approached again. This time, their posture was different. There was no authority in it, only curiosity. They asked if she would consider working with students, even in a small way. The woman paused, pen hovering over the paper. She shook her head gently. She said she was not ready for that. The teacher nodded, understanding more than they said aloud. They thanked her again and stepped away. When the woman finished the form, she handed it back and thanked the receptionist. She gathered her things and walked toward the exit. As she reached the door, she glanced back down the hallway. The piano stood where she had left it, silent now, waiting for the next set of hands. She felt a familiar pull, but she resisted it. She stepped outside into the fresh air. The city noise returned, grounding her. Cars passed. People hurried by, unaware of what had happened inside the building. She walked away slowly, blending back into the world she had chosen. Behind her, the music academy remained still, holding on to a moment that had changed more than just expectations. Inside, the teachers stood quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. They had learned something that day, though they were not yet sure what to do with it. And somewhere between memory and silence, the woman carried her music with her, untouched, waiting for the moment it might be needed again. The days that followed passed quietly for the woman, just the way she preferred. She returned to her small routine, waking early, walking familiar streets, and keeping her thoughts simple. Yet something had changed inside her. The moment at the academy had followed her home, settling into her mind when things grew quiet. She tried not to think about it, but music has a way of returning when invited, even by accident. At night, she caught herself tapping rhythms on the table. In the morning, melodies surfaced without warning. She reminded herself that it was only memory, nothing more. Back at the academy, however, the atmosphere was different. Teachers spoke about her in low voices. Students replayed the moment in their heads, each adding their own meaning to it. The story spread quickly, though details shifted as stories often do. Some said she was famous once. Others said she had disappeared on purpose. No one knew the truth, and she was not there to correct them. A senior instructor called a meeting. They spoke openly about what had happened, admitting that assumptions had been made too quickly. It was uncomfortable but necessary. The academy prided itself on discipline and tradition, yet this moment had revealed a blind spot. Talent did not always arrive wearing confidence or titles. There was discussion about reaching out to the woman. Some suggested inviting her back, offering a formal role. Others worried it would feel like pressure. In the end, they agreed to proceed carefully. A letter was written, respectful and simple. It expressed apology, admiration, and an open invitation to return if she wished. No demands, no expectations, just an acknowledgement. When the letter arrived at her door, she held it for a long time before opening it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She read it once, then again. The words were kind, but they stirred emotions she had worked hard to quiet. She did not answer right away. Days passed. The letter rested on her table, untouched. She went about her life, but the decision followed her everywhere. Returning meant questions, tension, a possible return to a world she had left behind. One afternoon, she passed a small community center and heard a piano being played inside. The notes were uneven, unsure, but full of effort. She stopped and listened through the open window. A young student struggled through a simple tune, repeating the same mistake again and again. Without thinking, she stepped inside. The room was warm and modest. The piano was worn, missing its shine, but still alive. The student looked up, embarrassed, expecting correction. The woman smiled gently and offered a small suggestion. Just one change. The student tried again, and the music improved instantly. Their face lit up with surprise. That moment felt different from the academy. There was no judgment, no performance, just learning. She stayed longer than planned, helping quietly, never taking control, only guiding. When she finally left, she felt lighter. That evening, she returned home and picked up the letter again. This time, she wrote a short reply. She thanked them for their words and agreed to return, but only to speak, not to perform. When she arrived at the academy again, there was no crowd waiting. The teachers greeted her with genuine respect. They listened as she spoke about music, about humility, about how talent grows in silence as much as in spotlight. She did not tell her full story. She did not need to. What mattered was the shift that followed. The academy changed in small but important ways. Students were encouraged to listen before judging. Teachers learned to ask questions before making decisions. As for the woman, she did not reclaim the life she had left. She did not return to stages or applause. Instead, she found a quiet balance, offering guidance where it was welcome and stepping back when it was not. Music remained part of her life, not as a burden, but as a companion. And sometimes, late in the evening, when the world was quiet, she would sit at a piano, play a few gentle notes and smile, knowing she had found her own way to belong again. The academy settled into a new rhythm after her return. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was noticeable to those who paid attention. The halls felt calmer. Lessons felt slower, more thoughtful. Students listened more carefully not only to the music but to each other. The woman did not visit often. When she did, she stayed only for a short time. She never announced herself. She never corrected anyone publicly. She sat in the back of rooms, watching quietly, speaking only when invited. Some students noticed her presence and felt nervous at first, but that feeling faded when they realized she was not there to judge. One afternoon, a student struggled through a difficult passage and stopped, frustrated. The room grew tense. The teacher prepared to step in, but the woman gently raised a hand. She did not criticize. She asked the student how the music felt. The question surprised everyone. The student thought for a moment, then answered honestly. They said it felt rushed, like they were chasing the notes instead of guiding them. The woman nodded and suggested slowing down not the tempo, but the mind. The student tried again. The difference was immediate. Moments like that spread quietly through the academy. They were not lessons from a book. They were lessons from experience. The teachers began to reflect on their own paths. Many of them had trained for years, chasing perfection, chasing approval. Somewhere along the way, some had forgotten why they loved music in the first place. Watching the woman reminded them. Still, questions lingered. Some teachers wanted to know more about her past. Not out of curiosity alone, but out of respect. They sensed she carried stories worth learning from. They waited patiently, not wanting to push. One evening, after a long day, the woman stayed behind with a small group of teachers. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that invites honesty. Someone finally asked what made her leave music the way she had. She took a long breath before answering. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. She explained that success can be loud, and sometimes that noise drowns out the self. She had spent years performing, traveling, meeting expectations that grew heavier each time she met them. When personal loss entered her life, the pressure became unbearable. Music, which once healed her, began to hurt, so she stepped away. Not because she stopped loving music, but because she wanted to survive. The teachers listened without interrupting. There was no pity in the room, only understanding. She made it clear that she did not regret her choice. The quiet life had given her balance. It had allowed her to hear music again without fear. After that conversation, something shifted. The teachers no longer saw her as a mystery to solve. They saw her as a reminder. Word of her presence spread beyond the academy. A local group organizing a small music event reached out, asking if she would consider playing. The request was polite, hopeful. She declined. Not long after, another request came. Then another. Each time she refused kindly. She was not running from music. She was protecting her relationship with it. Instead, she began spending more time at community spaces. Places without stages or programs. Places where music was shared, not displayed. She helped children discover rhythm through clapping games. She guided older learners through simple melodies, celebrating progress no matter how small. These moments filled her in a way applause never had. Back at the academy, a student prepared for an important assessment. Anxiety hung heavy in the room. The student feared failure, feared being judged. The woman noticed and asked to speak with them alone. She told them something simple, that music is not a test of worth, that mistakes are not proof of weakness, that even silence has value. The student entered the assessment calmer than expected and played with honesty. It was not perfect, but it was real. The teachers noticed. As weeks passed, the academy changed from the inside out. Rankings mattered less. Listening mattered more. Students stayed longer after lessons, talking about music instead of rushing away. The woman watched these changes quietly. She never claimed responsibility. She never sought credit. One evening, she returned to the piano hall alone. The same piano waited there, familiar and patient. She sat down not to perform but to remember. She played softly, letting the notes wander without direction. There was no audience, no expectation, just sound and breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely at peace. She stood, closed the piano gently, and left the hall knowing that whatever came next would be on her terms. The academy, once unchanged for years, continued to evolve. And at the center of that change was not a performance, but a person who reminded everyone that music begins with humanity. Time passed, and life continued to move forward in quiet, steady ways. The woman kept her simple routine, but it no longer felt small, felt full. Each day carried purpose, even in the smallest moments. Music stayed close to her, no longer as a weight, but as a gentle presence. At the academy, the changes that had begun earlier became part of everyday life. New students arrived, some confident, some unsure, all carrying their own hopes. Teachers greeted them differently now. They listened more. They asked questions. They remembered the lesson they had learned without ever writing it down. The woman visited less often, but her influence remained. When students struggled, teachers reminded them that progress did not always sound perfect. When tension rose, someone would say softly that music was meant to be felt, not feared. These words became part of the culture, passed along without credit. One afternoon, the academy hosted a small open session for families and local listeners. It was not a competition or a concert, just a chance to share music. Students played simple pieces. Some made mistakes. Others stopped and started again. No one rushed them. The woman attended quietly, sitting near the back. She had not planned to stay long, but the honesty of the performances kept her there. She watched faces light up when a melody landed just right. She saw relief when a mistake was met with encouragement instead of silence. Near the end of the session, a teacher announced that anyone who wished could play, regardless of level. There was no pressure, just an open invitation. The room waited. The woman felt the familiar pull again, stronger this time. She hesitated, feeling the weight of many eyes even before they turned toward her. She had avoided moments like this for years, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer afraid of being seen. She was afraid only of denying herself honesty. She stood and walked toward the piano. There was no surprise this time, only quiet anticipation. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She did not bring sheet music. She did not plan what to play. She began with a simple melody, soft, almost fragile. It sounded like a beginning rather than a performance. The notes flowed easily, shaped by feeling rather than technique. Listeners leaned in not because they were impressed, but because they felt included. The melody grew, not louder, but deeper. It carried warmth, memory, and gratitude. It told a story without words, one of loss, choice, and return. She did not play long. She did not need to. When the final note faded, the room remained quiet, just as it had the first time. But this silence felt different. It was not filled with shock or regret. It was filled with understanding. Applause came slowly, gently, then faded just as softly. She stood, nodded once, and returned to her seat. After the session ended, several people approached her, thanking her not for her skill, but for the feeling she shared. She accepted their words kindly, then slipped away before the room could grow heavy. Later that evening, she walked home as the sun dipped low. The city moved around her, unaware of the quiet moment that had just passed. She felt content, not because she had been heard, but because she had chosen when to speak. The academy continued its work, shaping musicians who understood that sound begins with care. Teachers carried forward the lesson they had once learned the hard way. Students grew not only in skill, but in patience. As for the woman, she did not return to a public stage. She did not seek recognition. She found joy in balance, in choosing when music entered her life and when it rested. Sometimes she played for herself. Sometimes she shared. Sometimes she simply listened. And in that choice she found freedom. The story that began with judgment ended with respect, not because of a single performance, but because people learned to look beyond appearances. The piano remained where it always had, waiting for hands willing to approach it with humility. And somewhere in the quiet between notes, the woman smiled, knowing she had never lost her music. She had only learned how to carry it gently on her own terms.